Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But KSJE is now listener supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm DelSheree Gladden. I'm a USA Today bestselling author of over 30 published novels. And on this episode, I have Brit Ward. He's local to Farmington. He's the author of one novel and also a playwright and working on various other creative projects. Brit, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, like you said, I'm Brit Ward. I'm mostly a playwright and a filmmaker more than I am a novelist. Piggy was kind of I don't know what that was, me expressing some hidden thought in my mind that turned into a novel over the course of several months. But mostly I dabble in film and stuff where actors will read my words as opposed to you sitting at home reading my words. But every once in a while, the pros will take me.
Well, I think a lot of creative people have multiple outlets that they need to kind of get whatever they've got going on out into the world for other people.
It's almost an impulse, isn't it? Where you just can't help yourself.
It really is. I did want to talk about the novel first, because that's the one I've had a chance to read, and then we'll jump into some of your playwright work, which some of that I have been able to see because my daughter Abigail has worked with you on a few projects. But
yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So with your novel, Piggy, tell me a little bit about just where it came from.
So Piggy's actually, I think, like a decade old at this point or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was originally a short film, and it was I was a new parent at the time, so every sort of anything that threatens your child becomes this like dramatic issue in your mind. And for me, I had overheard an interview on television that I completely misrepresented. I didn't even hear it properly, but basically there was this idea of certain individuals, less than reputable individuals, being allowed to seek therapy instead of going to jail, and that bothered me as a young parent. So before I knew it, I'd written a short film called Piggy, which was my first attempt at making a film, and it went nowhere. It was an unmitigated disaster, actually. A lot of people would agree to help me, and they would actually read the script and like, what is this about? And I'm like, oh, well, probably should have warned you. And eventually I was so frustrated with it. The short film turned into what is effectively the middle section of the book, and then a whole book appeared around it. And the two characters, Emma and Justice, kind of sprang from that. And before I knew it, I had a novel sitting in my lap, and I'm like, where did this come from?
Well, that's really cool that it started as one thing and then morphed into something not necessarily different, but a new version in an expanded form.
And it's a weird thing when that happens, because novel writing is not something you can do impulsively, because it's such a and even now I look back at Piggy and I'm like, I wish I could do a few things differently, but novel writing is such an exhaustive process that it's not just you got a first draft and you're good. You have to go back through and reread and rewrite and do all those things over and over again. Whereas a lot of, as much as it's weird to say, I don't have to revise as much with theater work because the dialogue's a little easier for me.
And that's something that for a lot of people is not the easy part of writing.
Right.
I haven't been teaching lately, but when I used to work with teen writers, that was one of the biggest challenges, was writing dialogue with them. Because I think it's a different idea of writing down what you think people sound like when you're writing a story compared to what people actually sound like, and then finding that in-between balance of sounding realistic without being too realistic that we get all the ums and and start over and repeat yourself kind of stuff.
Right. Well, it's something when I help younger filmmakers out and such, when they're writing their dialogue, all their dialogue is always stilted every time first go round. And I try to encourage them, like, everyone writes like this. I write like this, but over time you can make it. You're not trying to write realistic dialogue. You're trying to simulate something that feels like reality but isn't actually. I always encourage people to watch Gilmore Girls as a master class in something where somebody handles heightened dialogue very well, because nobody talks like Gilmore Girls in real life, and yet it's believable.
Exactly. And that's really like what you're shooting for, is that believability without
Yeah, that's a great word.
overdoing it.
Yep, exactly right.
And I felt like your dialogue throughout Piggy like flowed really well. That's usually something for me when I'm reading for fun or even reading critically for stuff like this for the interviews. Dialogue is one of those things that will get under my skin faster than just about anything. So I always appreciate it when I get to read something that has really smooth dialogue that flows well, and I thought did a really nice job with that throughout this.
No, I appreciate that. I think it helps that it's my background a little bit, but theater and everything.
Yeah, that I took one screenwriting class when I was working on my master's, and that was just like a whole new style and world of writing for me. It was a fun exercise. I was like, wow, this is so different.
Well, it changes your perspective, because so much of the novelist's palette is the English or whatever language you're writing in, and you're always bordering between poetry and description, and using the words as your tools, and then to stop and have this concrete thing that is supposed to be happening in reality in the form of dialogue. It's almost an interruption to the main mechanism that is the novel. And I find that it's hard to navigate. That was a hard thing for me with Piggy, where it was like, I have to go into this and I have to do it naturally and without that jarring effect of, now we're going to have info dump or whatever bit of dialogue that will kind of interrupt that, even the reader's flow, in addition to the writer's flow. Like, it all kind of can feel jarring when you change from just prose to dialogue.
Definitely. And something that I was thinking about, knowing that, you do a lot of theater and playwriting, was that this book, it deals with abuse, a lot of emotion, a lot of internal thought as the characters work through what they're experiencing. And that's not something you get to write in a play necessarily. You rely on the actors to portray that emotion and to connect with the audience in that way. But writing in novel form, you've got to give that to the reader. And I wanted to ask you about that experience of one to the other, like how you do that in playwright to try to make sure that the actors get across what you're getting, and then how that was different working in novel form.
That is a wonderful question. I've never thought about this. What I think is interesting, and you're right, there's a lot more laying out foundational emotional information when you're writing a novel. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry what your protagonists are doing and feeling. And in a play, which is necessarily going to be a collaborative effort from the beginning, you don't want to step on an actor's toes by telling them exactly what their motivation or their action is going to be. And so a lot of it is a tool that novelists use too, but is way more common in film and theater, which is, of course, subtext. That becomes the most powerful of your sort of tools, where you're often hinting at something rather than talking about it. The worst dialogue is often the ones that directly say the thing. So, as someone comes in the room and all the characters go, "Hey, look, it's Bernie," that's useless dialogue. It doesn't help anyone. I had a teacher once who described a scene where it's a husband coming home, and the best way to write that scene is to have his wife not acknowledge him at all, instead of him saying, "Honey, why isn't dinner ready?" Because then we know there's tension without them saying anything, and that allows the actors to play with it too, where they can emphasize little details here. So as long as he says, "Honey, I'm back," or whatever, he can take that a million different directions instead of them directly fighting. And that a novel, I think, you do more of a build up to that, where you're laying that foundation, and then you have the sort of either catharsis or the climax, compared to playwriting, where you sort of build on it, and then the director and the actors are going to pick where that moment happens.
That's really fascinating. I've never done any theater or anything like that. That sounds absolutely awful to me, to have to be in front of people doing that sort of thing. I don't know where my daughter gets it from. But that's really interesting. I think that that would be really hard as the person creating something to give so much of it to an actor to portray. And that's just because I come from, all of my work is on the page.
Hmm.
What is that like, seeing actors take on what you've created and putting their own feel into it?
Well, I do think there's a degree of separation where Edward Albee always talked about, there's a difference between playwrights and novelists, and that it is a different personality type. And you do see the likes of, I think there was a famous interview with Dean Koontz where he railed on every sort of adaptation of his books have been terrible films. And screenwriters are notoriously do not like him or working with him because he's very protective of his words, and that's not unique to him. That's all writers, and I don't portray that as a negative thing. I understand when you're the artist of a piece that's yours. You do have to separate yourself as a playwright because going in knowing that this is going to be taken by other people and it's going to be very different from what you imagined, and so you sort of have to mentally prepare yourself for it. And when I'm guilty of this, younger playwrights and screenwriters tend to overstep their bounds, which I definitely did a few times, and almost demand an acquiescence to original vision. Like, this is not what I wrote, and it's like, well, it doesn't matter anymore. And it can be that first few times, it's almost like your first time sitting through a workshopping session where people are criticizing you. You've never experienced that before, and it's the most horrifying experience, and you learn to get used to it, and you're like, oh, it's just part of the process. But that first time was awful. It feels terrible.
It does. And that's something, like, working with younger writers, especially teens, a lot of them are terrified of showing their
Yeah.
work to anybody else. It's such a tender age where you're trying to figure out yourself and how to express yourself. And then to put something near and dear to your heart out for somebody to be like, no. That's so hard. And trying to find a safe space to do that in.
Right.
I remember I had a girl in my class who was just like, no, I can't share my stuff with anybody. They'll think there's something wrong with me because I write about dark stuff. She's like, I don't think about, like, doing any of these things. She's like, I'm just exploring, that side of humanity or whatever. And she was just, like, so scared that her parents were going to think she was, like, this horribly messed up child because she was writing about some darker stuff.
And the reality is other writers would it's not the darkness that they're going to find problem with. It's going to be, grammar.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's fascinating, but it's true. It's you're turning over just in the way that acting is showing your vulnerability in front of an audience. Writing is doing so through words. I mean, even if, like, I've nothing like the experiences in Piggy is something I've ever experienced personally. I was pulling a lot of that from external sources, but writing about it, there's a raw, I'm in there, obviously. There's my vulnerabilities, and showing that to someone and having someone say, this is bad. it's painful, but part of the process, unfortunately.
It is. That's really where you can get that chance to step back and take a more objective look at what you're doing, which in those early stages is pretty painful and hard. But it does teach you a lot. And I think going through that process in any art form or creative pursuit, I think it's an important part because you do learn so much from it.
Absolutely. And it gets easier over time. I mean, like we were talking about Piggy, I've reread Piggy in the last year, and I went, oh man, I want to do some things differently. But that's how you grow. You don't really learn without the pain, so.
Yeah, it sticks with you and it teaches you and you remember it for next time.
That's right.
And that's something with Piggy, some of the themes that came up in it were things that I think a lot of creative people experience as they're going through the process of learning their path in whatever form of art they're taking. And just some of the things that really, like, stuck out to me were kind of making peace with experiences that you've had, whether they be as traumatic as something, that happened with Emma in Piggy, or just really anything that you've been through and finding your inner strength and learning to forgive yourself and others. It was a very emotional book, and I felt like that was something that really would speak to a lot of readers on a lot of different levels.
Gosh, I wish my sales reflected that. No, I'm kidding, of course. Um, I did not write Piggy to make sales. I wrote Piggy because, I had no artistic choice but to do so. But I think it's fascinating because you've kind of framed it against talking about journeying as an artist as well. And I have such a specific vision of Piggy that I had never thought of it outside of the frameworks of the book itself and its context. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, hey, nicely accidentally done, Brit. Hey, that feels good.
I think it's funny that, going through a lot of critique literature type classes when I was in school and how much you're asked to break down someone else's work and often, from decades past their work.
Right.
And, a million people have tried to explain and put their own slant on so many of the classics. And it's an interesting experience to do that with current authors. And
Right.
you
Because you can talk to them now.
yeah, this is what I got from it. What were you intending? What did you get from it? It's so neat how everybody's experience is a little bit different. And that doesn't make one or the other right or wrong. It's just that was their experience. That was their takeaway from something. And it may be vastly different from what the author intended, but that's okay. That's part of the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's a neat thing to see happen with your work.
Kind of the strengths of postmodernism in that regard.
And that's something like with novels, you have to, wait for someone to tell you, or if you're brave enough, read a review. I stay away from reading reviews. That's the worst part.
Yeah.
With, playwright, with seeing something of your work performed, you get more immediate feedback. And what is that like? What is your thoughts on that between the two types of projects?
It's a complicated experience, weirdly, or maybe obviously, I'm not sure. Because the two experiences for me would be, of course, Sherlock and the Sherlock Holmes, not adaptation, but original story I wrote, and then Treasure Island. And with Sherlock Holmes, that was both wonderful and harrowing because I'm watching it going, oh, that's got to change. That's got to change. I'm like sitting here with an audience and I can't tell if I'm projecting discomfort onto them or if I'm just being too hard on myself or whatever. But there were things that I was like, I got to go through and change all of this. And that's where it's useful to have people around who can give you objective feedback and say, no, slow down, maybe just this little part tweak here, or yes, redo this entire set, whatever it might be. Treasure Island was a different one where I thought that, unfortunately, that's a weird one because that production was cursed, I guess, because they kept having to cancel productions and other awful things that would keep happening. It was one where I was really proud of that script, and that was actually a very collaborative script. A lot of the T-board and stuff really helped me shape that. So it was a polished script, but because the production was so, the theater gods were just deciding that one was not going to go smoothly. It was hard to gauge, and I won't quibble about direction or anything publicly because that would be impolite. But I all I could really get from Treasure Island was like, that was a really great cast, because it was one of the best casts I've ever seen put together. They just never got their chance to really make it their own, and that'll always be my memory of Treasure Island. Unfortunately, is that they had their chance to build their story and put their authorship on it, and they didn't get to, and I was disappointed by that. So I didn't get a pure experience with it. But with Sherlock, it was more of me just going through notes in my head. So I'm not sure I should watch my own plays. I might not be the best audience member.
That is a tough thing. I think no matter what creative form, there's probably some level of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't imagine watching something of mine being performed in that manner. That does seem extremely intimidating. But I will
surreal.
say, yeah, I bet. I was gonna say though, I really enjoyed the script of Treasure Island, and I thought the cast did an amazing job too, and not just because my daughter was in it, but overall, I thought everybody did so well. And I think I ended up seeing it or attempting to see it about 5 times between all the different
Became
things
very
going
familiar
on
with that
with
first
it.
act.
Yeah, we knew the first act really well by the end.
Well,
But
if I may offer you a defense, because I know we always worry about, any kind of nepotistic behavior. Your daughter is amazing talent. Like, that's not just me saying that. That was the entire collective, board, and everyone involved. They were like, "Who is this?" When we did Midsummer Night's Dream, it was everyone saw it from the beginning. So to be fair to you and the audience listening, she's amazing. She's great.
oh, thank you. I'm glad. It's hard when you're the parent. You're always like, they're fantastic, but
You
she
want to
she
temper
had
your
so much
stuff,
fun.
but yeah.
But I did like I really enjoyed the twist that you put on the Treasure Island story with Jim becoming Jennifer and
Hmm.
just that different dynamic that you don't get in the original version. It was a fun twist on it, and it brought it, even though it's still set, in whatever time period. My mind's blanking, but
Yeah, I genuinely just forgot as well.
I'm like in the past. It
Yes.
it it gave like a nice kind of more modern feel to it that I know a lot of my nieces and nephews and friends that went and saw it who didn't really have any particular feelings toward the original or maybe had never even read the book,
Hmm.
connected with it and really enjoyed it and had a lot of fun with it. And adapting something is a whole other art as well. What was that like, trying to take a classic novel? It's been made into film and plays who knows how many times, and
Hmm.
turning that into something that was unique and yours. What was that process like?
What's surprising to me was that was a lot of fun and actually relatively simple. I had notes from the studio, as it were, but really it's just the Theater Ensemble Arts board. But the notes were like, it's got to be a female lead because the book itself is mostly men. I mean, there's like one female character in the entirety of the book, and that's the mother. And I don't even think she gets the dignity of a name. It's been a while since I've read it, a couple of summers ago, in fact. But they were like, there need to be more female characters if you can do that, and so that actually was my starting point because you brought up it was a different dynamic, and that's absolutely what came through when I was writing it because it had you know Jim in the book. He doesn't change. He has no character arc, and I always kind of frustrated me. I was like, there's nothing here. He's just there as a vessel for the reader, and I don't enjoy that kind of fiction. So I knew that Jennifer was going to have an arc, and I knew that unlike the story where I think Jim's father passes away part through the slog that is the beginning of that book, I feel like I'm insulting the book, but I not terribly, I'm not a terribly big fan of Treasure Island, the book, and I feel bad saying that because I totally took his material and ran with it, but it's in the public domain, it's fine. Um, I knew I wanted there to be more of a relationship where Jennifer had that strong relationship with her father, and that he would pass before the story, and that started to inform everything in the book. So I knew that she would have that as her kind of, you know, missing her father, her relationship with her mother, the fact that she'd be a little older, and she had to be a little older. I think it would have been hard to do some of the stuff we did having a younger Jennifer. And it also informed like the creation of Minerva, who's a completely, that was my character. I invented her. In She became that kind of platonic ideal for Jennifer, but in a very negative way, and that offered this actual sort of moral gray choice between Long John Silver or Minerva, and all that started to come out of it. It just became this like delight to put on the paper because the characters came alive and sort of almost guided themselves through it. I feel like I didn't do anything because the characters were very, very vivid in my head.
That's awesome. I love that experience when the characters come alive and really start
Hmm.
playing a part in the creation of the story. And I think that sounds weird to people who maybe don't write, that happens, that your characters really do kind of take over at times. But I think when they do
Yes.
that, it really adds a different layer to a story.
Well, and it makes it feel lived in almost. Well, these were people, not caricatures.
Exactly. Yeah, they really take on a life beyond the borders of the page. And that adds a lot of realism to a story when you feel like this story didn't just start on page 1. There's so much more to it. We're just getting this glimpse of a particular part of their life. And that's a really cool experience.
Well, that was another dramatic cue I took, or not dramatic, excuse me, another cue I took from Robert Louis Stevenson, which was his point of attack is much earlier in the timeline. And we knew kind of from the get-go, when I was talking with the board of directors, I said, I'm going to start it later in the story. There's a famous character named Billy Bones who's never featured in the play, but he's just referenced. And I was like, that's a better point of attack because it's very, what's the in media res or whatever. It's very much we're already going once the story starts. And that momentum, I think, carries through into the script, and it made it easier it kind of added energy to the actors and such. Before all the disastrous stuff started happening, I got to watch a rehearsal, and it was neat to watch because I didn't feel like I had to judge my words. They were doing such a good job, even where I failed. It was just, you could just hear it in the cast, and it doesn't hurt that when I wrote Jennifer, there was concern about who was going to get cast, but we had thrown out a few names. And because I'd worked with Abby the prior summer in Midsummer Night's Dream, I was like, there's a good chance she's going to be Jennifer, isn't she? And so even though she ended up playing the character, hers was a voice that I had when I was writing the character. So it kind of all worked out in full circle mode. That made me happy.
Oh, that's good. Well, and despite, the craziness of the actual production of Treasure Island, I think it really came together so well and really enjoyed it. So I hope you have more planned for the future? What do you have going on that's going to come up?
Mostly film stuff at the moment, which a lot of the people that were in Treasure Island are involved in my film plans, so we'll see that they'll get to do stuff again. But the film stuff, I can't talk about specifics yet because it's still kind of in the incubation period. We're just about to get started on filming soon. And then I think I'm directing Much Ado About Nothing this summer, and I'm adapting another famous public domain story, but I'm not allowed to say the title just yet because we're not sure if it's going to happen. But I'm doing more public domain stuff, so that'll be fun.
Oh, great. Well, when you're ready to talk about it, let me know. That sounds exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Any fiction type stuff in the works?
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm writing a fantasy novel.
Oh, nice.
I've never thought that was a thing I would do, and nothing against fantasy novels or authors. I love them. I'm a Tolkien nerd. I knew more about his languages before I'd ever actually read The Lord of the Rings because I'm such a nerd of his. But yeah, I finally just had an idea. It started as a Star Wars fan fiction, I guess. And before I knew it, I had this weird fantasy world built out, and I was like, I guess it's actually a fantasy story, and I'm going to run with it. And it became its own thing, so we'll see what happens with that. But that's what I've been working on. That as a matter of prose, and taking my lessons from Piggy and trying to be a little more deliberate in the process. And we'll see how that turns out. Hopefully well, but, it's always a journey.
It is. Well, and good luck with that. I hope I get to see something of it at some point. But
Excellent.
Where can people find you if they want to stay up to date on what you've got going on?
Usually I'm opining on Twitter about nothing or complaining about sports or something, but I'm sharing my insights on twitter.com/Brit Ward. It's usually the easiest place. I'm not a social media fan, but I'm there occasionally.
All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and for people who are interested, look up Brit Ward. He's got his novel Piggy, and then keep an eye out for some future theater productions and hopefully film that we might get to see at some point.
Yes.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.